So I remember, I remember when right after I graduated from college, I had the blessing of being part of this one church that had a men's group. I got into it through Emily because it was her church, and so when we were getting married, I went and joined her church, and I was really blessed to be part of the men's group at this church, which in some ways provided for me an experience that I'd never had before of being with men who are comfortable with their emotions, and they helped me to grow into that and to learn how to take my emotions to God. And that was I felt like I became a changed person through being part of this men's group. But this men's group was interesting in one way in that it was not, even though the church really they did have several of these groups for both men and women, there was always a little bit of a tension in the church because they're like, well, we're doing emotional healing stuff in this group? What about Jesus, right? Where does Jesus fit into that? And so there was a little bit of tension in the church, and I was new to the church. I didn't know what I was doing, and in this men's group, I'm benefiting from it. And I went out with one of the leaders for breakfast once, and I was like, what's up with all of this? Why is this happening at this church? Why are people conflicted about it? And I don't remember everything he said. He was a great guy. I don't remember everything he said, though. But one of the things he said stuck with me ever since is that he said, people are looking for power to live. People are looking for power to live. And when we find in Jesus power to live, that's wonderful. And when Jesus gives us power to live, even when his name isn't mentioned through this men's group where we're doing more emotional healings type stuff, that is also power to live that comes from God. And so that was kind of his way of explaining that. But what stuck with me ever after was this question of, we're all looking for power to live. We're all looking for power to live with freedom and dignity and wholeness. In our passage today, we have someone who comes to the synagogue looking for that. It's always struck me that this guy shows up to the synagogue and apparently he has a demon, right? This is not, you've got the story of the guy who's out in the tombs cutting himself with stones, and you're like, okay, clearly this guy's got a demon, but this guy it's not church, but he came to church, so to speak, right? He showed up at synagogue where you're supposed to read the Old Testament and stuff like that. You're coming to praise God, to pray to God, and he shows up. And there's nothing, it doesn't seem like this was surprising. You don't get all the details, but I'm just imagining here, he just looks like everybody else. But there's a sense in which he's not like everybody else there, at least. Maybe, there might be a few others. We don't have the full story. But he shows up and he's looking for power to live. He's looking for redemption. That's why the Jews showed up at synagogue, is they during the exile, they're like, we don't have a temple anymore. We're looking for a way to be God's people. We're looking for God to come and redeem us. So they said, well, we'll start gathering around his written word. We start gathering to pray. And the synagogue procedure started then, even though they're back in the land, they're still doing this because they're still looking for redemption. They're still looking for freedom in their world, redemption, healing in their world and in themselves. That's why he's there. But somehow, at least up to this point, he hasn't found that same freedom that he needs. The only real clue we get about this is, the fact that he's there, and the fact that when the people hear Jesus and see what he does, they say, wow, this guy's got authority, and it's not like the people that are normally preaching to us. It's not like the scribes who have showed up. There's something different going on here that is giving this man power to live. And we've never seen anything like it. And it's giving all of us power to live, they're saying. They're saying this teaching has authority. It's affecting our lives. The Apostle Paul is big on this, where he talks about how the law doesn't give power to live. They gathered around the Torah, the law of God, in the first 5 books of the Bible, and they read from the prophets, but it didn't. The words didn't give them power to live. I don't know about you guys, but I've been at periods in my life where rules were a really big deal. And I think about rules, nowadays I think about rules like the rules in the Bible and stuff like that, a lot more like warning labels on products. They tell you the obvious things you shouldn't do with it. It's like, you obviously should not put this bag over your head and walk around, okay? They tell you things to protect you, they tell you things to keep you safe, to not, wreck yourself in God's world, okay? But it's very different to like say, know what not to do with your life than it is to know how to live. The law doesn't give us power to live. It's still good. I'm so glad we have it. But it doesn't give the power to live. And the teachings of the traditions that the Jews were passing on, the teaching on the law, that was not enough. That was not enough to set this man free. And Paul seems to think it's not really enough to set anybody free. If you read through Galatians and Romans, that's kind of one of the main points. But then comes Jesus. And it's fascinating to me that when Jesus shows up, the evil starts to mount a resistance. Apparently this guy, we don't know the full story, but I'm like in my assumption world, like he's been at the synagogue before and it's not been an issue for him. But when Jesus shows up, suddenly there's something in him that can't handle that anymore. He can't handle the contact with the true authority of God. And honestly, I would say in my own life, I find it to be true that when I start to make contact, when I start with God, when I start to do more serious spiritual work, it almost feels like things get worse before they get any better. There's a tension starts to rise. We could call it demons, or it could be something else. I'm not going to take any stance on demons. I'm very interested in the topic because of some reading and an experience of a guy I'm mentoring who's like blowing my mind on this. But I'm not going to teach about that. It's not the right context. Okay? It's very interesting, but we don't have time for it now. But whatever the situation, in this situation, it's a demon. We often find, I think, that what the evil that is in us from whatever source chafes or resists the presence of God. It becomes almost harder rather than easier when God starts to show up. And so the evil in this man cries out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." And so he asks a question. And I think at one level we all know the answer to "have you come to destroy us" at one level is, yeah, Jesus came to destroy evil, right? Like, it's not just like he opens the cage, it's like zap and the cage is gone. Like, he has come to destroy evil. Evil is going to be undone, right? There's the great phrase from C.S. Lewis, everything sad is going to come untrue, right? He is going to destroy evil. That's his business. That is, in fact, why he came. So at one level, the answer is yes, he has come to destroy the us being the evil. But at another level, it's a little more complicated than that. Because it's actually even really ambiguous in the way it's here in English. I think it probably is in Greek too, though I didn't get a chance to check. But it says he cries out this. But what it actually says here is there was a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out. Who's he? Is it the man? Is it the demon? It's kind of ambiguous. And it probably was in the situation, because at least every other indication we have is that when demons do bother to speak, they often do it through a human mouth. And so here is this man in the synagogue saying this. And so at one level, yes, the answer is yes, he's here to destroy the demon's power, the evil. But another level, the answer is like, well, no, he's not here to destroy that man by any means. Rather the opposite, right? It's easy to kind of just say this is a confusion in the text, but honestly, I feel like this is a confusion in our world. Don't we often find that we sometimes knowingly or unknowingly identify people with evil? I mean, you can go to this is the low-hanging fruit for kids who've been reading any books or watching any movies, right? Let's think of a villain, right? Who is the villain in a superhero comic or something, right? Who is the Redwall series is a fiction book I read as a child, and I've revisited recently. Clooney the Scourge, right? Like, you have these villainous characters, and they are so villainous that, like, you can't even imagine them not being evil, right? Like, what if Doc Ock from Spider-Man, like, what if he repented and became good? Like, okay? Like, we have this, and it's not just in the stories. We have this tendency to identify people with evil. And it's easy to do in stories, and it's easy to do outside of us with the enemy, right? We have this tendency, but you know what? I think we do it with ourselves. I have said before in the past, and I'll probably say again without really knowing fully what I'm saying, but I've before in the past said I'm just an anxious person. Now, I don't think anxiety is like evil in a moral sense, but it's certainly not part of the way God intended the world to function, right? Like that's not part of the good creation as he intended it, for me to be experiencing a lot of anxiety. But when I say I'm an anxious person, I'm identifying with this part in me that is broken. And I'm saying that's just who I am. Now, God works in all sorts of crazy ways in the world. And I'm not saying in the least that we should assume that that's going to somehow stop, that I will stop experiencing all anxiety in life is not something I'm claiming. But what I am claiming is it seems a little bit out of place for me to point to something that seems to be part of the fallen, twisted nature of the world and say, that's who I am. I'm just an angry person. I'm just an impatient person, right? But we know that's not the way we will be someday, right? If we are in Christ and we are made new, those will not be true of us someday. In other words, at the foundational level, that's not who we are. We might identify with our sins, we might identify with our sinful dispositions, but that's not who we are. And so comes Jesus. And Jesus has this amazing ability to distinguish between the sin that is so close to our heart we don't even recognize it's there and ourselves. He has the ability to distinguish such that when the voice that we don't even know which side of us it's coming from says, have you come to destroy us? He can say, well, yes and no. I'm not here to destroy you because you are my beloved child, whom I made good for an amazing and beautiful purpose. But there's something that is so tightly wrapped around you that you can't even tell that it's not you. And yes, I am here to destroy that. So freedom, the power to live, it comes from Jesus. There's not a tidy ending for that. And that's partly, I think, because when Jesus comes, it's interesting that Jesus does not be born in the manger and then raise his holy hand and say, "Be gone, all demons." And then somehow when he shows up on his earthly ministry, there's just none of them around, right? Somehow he decides that when he shows up to destroy evil, that he's going to have to wade into the middle of the mess and take care of it on a case-by-case, on a messy basis. In this case, it involves a little bit of mess in the service, where the man probably stands up and starts shouting. That's at least what happens in some of the other similar passages. It might be in our own lives more of a mess as we have to wrestle this out with God in prayer, or go to someone for help praying for us and with us. But I think the thing that's clear is that when Jesus shows up as the prophet like Moses, he has authority and we need to listen to him when he offers us freedom. And he has authority and evil has to listen to him when he says, "Yes, I am here to destroy you, evil." My invitation, if there is one here, is let's come to the Lord for freedom. Because that is why he came. He came to destroy the evil that chains us. I will just lapse into this brief story because I think it matters. So I know a fellow who I'd been talking to off and on, who had struggled with some sinful behaviors that he couldn't shake for years. He was an addict of sorts, and he knew it. and he prayed, and he even went to recovery groups, and he fasted, and nothing seemed to set him free. And then came Jesus in a new way. I wasn't there. I don't know what happened, but he told me afterwards that he went into this time of prayer in a unique way. And he talked with me a week or two later, and he's like, I don't have to do that anymore. He had experienced something, some kind of freedom that had changed his world radically. I don't think it happens that way every time, but it can. And so we can come to Jesus. And whether it's a slow process, which has been more my experience in life, has been much less dramatic. Like I've had like all these big dramatic things, but I feel like over time I have felt a growing freedom. Or whether it's in this guy's case where he experienced in a moment a freedom he hadn't felt for years despite everything he'd tried. Jesus has the authority, and he is offering freedom. So let's come to him. Let's come to him at his table, because his table is a place where he uniquely and powerfully offers his life to us to grant us freedom.